The morning of late March in Oakridge County did not bring the promise of spring. It brought a heavy, clinging mist that smelled of rotting pasture grass and saturated, freezing clay. The sky was the color of unpolished pewter, sagging low over the rolling hills of the Miller farm. 3 seconds of silence. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, heavy slosh of boots sinking into the spring mud. Wet mud compressing under rubber boots. Jacob Miller stood at the edge of the northern pasture. He was 58 years old, with broad shoulders slightly slouched from decades of lifting heavy hay bales. His face looked as though it had been carved directly out of the dense, white oak timber he farmed, his skin tough as oiled leather. Next to his left boot, Hank, the old border collie whose black coat had faded to a dusty charcoal and whose muzzle was entirely snow white, sat perfectly still. The dog's deep brown eyes followed the slow, structural lean of the boundary fence. 3 consecutive days of early spring thunderstorms had turned the earth into a fluid, unstable sponge. The old perimeter fence line, 300 feet of aged cedar and rusted wire, was giving up its grip on the valley. 3 massive white oak posts, cut from the densest heartwood and driven deep into this ground 70 years ago, when Ethan's grandfather first cleared the land and raised the farm's boundary during a warm, since-forgotten decade, had now snapped clean at the mud line. For 7 decades they had leaned on nothing but packed river gravel, standing through winter after winter of frost. But time, and 3 straight days of storm, had finally brought the old soldiers down. The high-tension barbed wire, strained to its absolute limit, hummed in the cold wind, sagging down until the sharp metal teeth bit into the dark mud. Barbed wire humming taut in the cold wind. Ethan Miller walked down the wet tractor path, his crisp, unfaded Carhartt canvas jacket rustling loudly with every stride. At 24, he carried the sharp, confident posture of someone who had spent the last 4 years looking at agriculture through the clean, predictable lens of university blueprints and technical manuals. In his right hand, he held a 25-foot chrome-plated Lufkin measuring tape clipped to his belt. In his left, he gripped a leather-bound clipboard filled with neatly drawn grid lines and mechanical pencil notes. He stopped by the first broken post, tapping the splintered, wetwood with the clean steel toe of his work boot. "It's not just the wind, Dad. The structural integrity of the entire perimeter is compromised. The tensile strength of this old wire can't handle the lateral soil displacement. If we just patch it with new cedar, the next heavy rain will tear it out again. Look at the mud. It's completely fluid. There's no frictional resistance for the wood to grip." For seconds of silence, Jacob didn't answer immediately. He moved with unhurried momentum, kneeling down as his large, calloused hand dipped into the wet earth. His thumbs, permanently split around the skin from decades of labor, dug into the black clay. He picked up a thick chunk of the heavy Oakridge clay, rolling it slowly between his bare fingers until it formed a smooth, slick ball. He squeezed it hard. The clay didn't crumble. It held its shape perfectly, glistening with trapped capillary moisture. "The mud isn't the problem, Ethan. The land isn't trying to tear the fence down. It's just trying to move. When you don't give it room to breathe, it takes what it needs." Ethan adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, which had begun to slide down his nose with sweat despite the chill. He looked down at his clipboard, his voice tightening with defensive confidence. "We can't farm on sentiment, Dad. We need infrastructure. Real infrastructure. State extension data shows this valley requires rigid foundations." Inside the kitchen of the Miller farmhouse, the air was thick, warm, and rich with the comforting scent of chicory coffee and salt pork. Sarah Miller moved quietly between the cast-iron wood stove and the sink, her silver-streaked hair kept in a neat, long braid over her right shoulder. Her pale canvas apron pockets bulged with cotton twine and a small ledger pencil. On the kitchen island, Ethan had spread out his master plan. It was a beautiful sheet of technical blueprint paper covered in precise lines, calculated weight distribution ratios, and architectural cross-sections. We do it once, and we do it right. We dig 42 inches deep, well below the frost line recorded in the state pamphlets. Then we pour a solid footer using high-strength Portland cement mixed with a sharp aggregate. By encasing the base of each oak post in a rigid concrete anchor, we eliminate any chance of lateral movement. The concrete creates an impenetrable barrier against the soil moisture, preventing the wood from shifting during the spring thaw. Thomas Reed is already doing it down the road at his new horse paddock. It's clean, it's permanent, and it's what the modern industry recommends. At the far end of the long oak table, Jacob sat near the window. The vintage blue enamel coffee pot sat steaming between them. In Jacob's palm was a dull gray whetstone. He was sharpening the blade of an old brush hook, the rhythmic, metallic sound filling the kitchen. Whetstone scraping steadily against steel. He didn't look at the blueprint. He didn't need to. Concrete is an anchor for a boat. Ethan, not a farm. Our ground isn't like the sandy loam they have over at the university test plots. This is Oakridge clay. It's heavy, it's stubborn, and it holds onto water like a secret. When you pour a block of stone into that clay, you aren't fixing anything. You're just building a giant wedge. When the winter comes, and that water turns to ice, that concrete block will become a sail. The frost will catch it, lift it, and snap that pretty oak post like a dry matchstick. Ethan shook his head, a flash of frustration crossing his face as he began aggressively rolling up the blueprint paper. The engineering is sound, Dad. The math doesn't change just because we're in Oakridge. Thomas Reed spent $3,000 on his concrete foundations this month, and his lines are straight as a die. Jacob went back to his sharpening, the low hum of the stone against steel returning to the room. Thomas Reed has been in this county for 5 years, son. The land hasn't truly introduced itself to him yet. The gravel parking lot of the Oakridge Feed and Supply was the unofficial heart of the county's life. It was Friday morning, the air smelling of milled grain, sweet molasses feed, and the sharp, oily tang of diesel exhaust from idling trucks. Thomas Reed's brand new, shiny GMC pickup truck was backed up to the main loading dock. 2 young store clerks were sweating through their shirts, stacking heavy, white paper bags of quick-setting concrete into the truck bed. The paper crinkled loudly under the immense weight, sending puffs of gray cement dust rising into the crisp air. Paper bags rustling and thudding, voices laughing. Thomas Reed stood leaning against his polished chrome tailgate, a wooden toothpick permanently tucked into the left corner of his mouth. He caught sight of the Millers and let out a booming laugh. "Morning, Jacob." "Morning, Ethan. Decided to join the 20th century? I told the boy here that if you don't use concrete on that northern line, you're just throwing your labor into the creek. You got to lock them posts down tight, Jacob. The weather's getting too wild for old-time tricks. Look at the catalog. Time is money." A group of older farmers, dressed in faded denim overalls, stood by the porch icebox, watching the exchange with quiet, knowing smiles. Ethan felt every eye on him. He held the yellow carbon copy of his concrete order form in his hand, his thumb pressing hard against the signature line. All it required was his father's nod to load 20 bags of the same concrete into their flatbed. Jacob walked past Thomas's truck without stopping, his old Red Wing leather boots crunching rhythmically on the gravel crunching under boot soles. He approached the rear of the Miller Farm's old green flatbed truck, which was backed up to the aggregate bins at the far end of the yard. The bed of the truck was already weighted down with 3 tons of coarse, multicolored river gravel, small, smooth stones no larger than a walnut, mixed with sharp, washed sand. "We're ready, Ethan." Jacob didn't look at Thomas, nor did he acknowledge the subtle laughter on the porch. Ethan looked at the concrete bags, then at the pile of loose, gray river stone. In his father's truck, to him, the gravel looked like a pile of useless debris, a fluid mass that possessed zero structural integrity. He felt a deep, burning embarrassment. "Sign the order form, Dad. Let's just do it the right way. Don't let them sit there and laugh at us." Jacob stopped, his hand resting on the weathered wooden side rack of the flatbed. He looked at his son, his deep eyes steady and completely devoid of anger. "They aren't laughing at us, Ethan. They're laughing at what they think they know. There's a big difference. Put the paper away. We have 300 feet of dirt waiting for us." The work began at dawn on Saturday, before the sun could burn the heavy crust of white frost off the pasture grass. Jacob refused to attach the hydraulic auger to the tractor's power takeoff. He claimed the spinning steel blade would slick the walls of the hole, glazing the wet clay into a waterproof cup that would trap moisture against the wood. Instead, he brought out the heavy, split-handle manual post-hole diggers. For 8 hours, the northern field was filled with the rhythmic, primitive sound of iron striking clay, iron blades chopping into heavy wet clay. Ethan's muscles burned within the first 2 hours. Every time he slammed the heavy iron blades into the earth, the wet, sticky clay clung to the metal, requiring him to scrape it off manually with a wooden wedge. Jacob worked with a steady, unhurried momentum, his movements so fluid they looked almost effortless. He dug every hole exactly 40 inches deep, straight and narrow. At the bottom of the open hole, Jacob didn't pour a footing. He dropped exactly 2 inches of coarse, washed sand. That's the floor, Ethan. It gives the bottom of the post a place to sit so it doesn't sink into the soft mud, but it doesn't trap the water. It lets it pass through. Then came the part that defied everything Ethan had read in his engineering textbooks. Jacob eased the heavy, 8-foot white oak post down into the center of the hole. The heartwood was raw, dense, and gave off a sharp, bitter smell of tannin. The same natural defense against rot that his own father used to say only ran this deep in white oak. He held the post dead straight, then nodded to Ethan. "Take the square shovel. Drop in 3 inches of the river gravel. No more, no less." Ethan shoveled the stones into the narrow gap around the wood. The loose gravel made a hollow, rattling sound as it hit the bottom, gravel clattering down into the hole. Jacob handed him a heavy, 6-foot solid iron tamping rod with a blunt steel head. "Now pack it. Don't just push it. Drive the iron down until the sound changes." Ethan raised the heavy iron rod and slammed it into the pebbles. Iron rod hammering stone. At first, the stones shifted wildly, rolling over one another like liquid. But as Ethan continued to strike with honest effort, the sound changed from a loose rattle to a deep, metallic thud. Gravel packing tight and dense. The smooth river stones, forced together by the immense downward pressure, began to shift, slide, and lock into one another. Their irregular shapes wedged together until they formed a dense, interlocking matrix. Jacob smiled at his son. "See that? Those stones aren't glued together with cement, Ethan, but they're locked. Your grandfather raised this whole line on nothing but white oak and river gravel, and it stood 70 years before it finally gave out this spring. Now we're putting in new wood, and this same gravel bed will carry it another lifetime. A fence post shouldn't fight the valley, son. It should live in it." Ethan wiped the sweat from his eyes, his hands raw and blistered despite his heavy leather gloves. He looked at the post. It was incredibly solid. He couldn't budge it even a fraction of an inch with his shoulder. Yet, in his mind, it still felt like a trick. It lacked the absolute, unyielding certainty of concrete. By late November, the fields of Oakridge were bare, covered in the pale, shattered stalks of the harvest. Then came the storm that the old-timers would talk about for the next 20 years. It started on a Tuesday with a strange, unnatural warmth. The temperature rose to 60 degrees, and the sky opened up, pouring 4 inches of torrential, freezing rain over the county. The heavy Oakridge clay was saturated to its absolute limit, holding millions of gallons of water just inches below the surface. On Thursday night, the wind shifted violently from the north. The mercury in the old thermometer outside the Miller kitchen window didn't just drop, it plummeted. It fell from 50 degrees down to 5 below zero in less than 9 hours. It was a true polar vortex, a deep, sudden freeze that caught the waterlogged valley completely unprepared. Inside the farmhouse, the timbers of the old building groaned as the intense cold shrank the wood. Old timbers creaking and cracking. Ethan sat by the wood stove, unable to sleep, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. The wind outside was a living thing, howling off the northern ridges, rattling the window panes with a high-pitched, metallic scream. Suddenly, through the roar of the blizzard, a sharp, explosive sound echoed across the open fields. A sharp crack like a rifle shot. Crack. It sounded distinct and clean in the freezing air. Hank stood up instantly, his ears pinned back, a low, anxious growl vibrating in his chest. 10 minutes later, another sound came. A heavy, structural groan followed by another sharp snap. That's the frost. The water's turning to ice out there, Ethan. When water freezes, it expands by 9%. It's got 30,000 pounds of pressure per square inch behind it. It's the strongest force in this valley. Put your coat on. We need to check the line. They walked out into the blinding white dark, their flashlights cutting narrow yellow tunnels through the driving snow. The cold was brutal, burning the lungs with every breath. Jacob swung his flashlight beam across the road, toward Thomas Reed's new horse paddock. What they saw was a scene of structural devastation. Thomas's expensive fence was twisting violently in the dark. The expanding moisture in the heavy clay had turned the solid concrete footers into giant wedges. Because the concrete was rigid and non-porous, the immense hydraulic pressure of the freezing earth had grabbed the flat sides of the concrete blocks, lifting them clean out of the ground like corks from a bottle. The heavy, 300-pound blocks of frozen cement were tilted at grotesque angles, and the oak posts encased within them had snapped at the ground line under the lateral stress. The modern foundation had destroyed the fence. Ethan's heart dropped into his stomach. He turned his flashlight beam toward their own northern line, his hand trembling from both the cold and the sudden terror that their own manual work had been obliterated by the same unstoppable force. The blizzard died before dawn, leaving Oakridge County buried under a pristine, silent blanket of white snow. The air was perfectly still, so cold that their breath hung in the air like smoke long after they had walked past. The complete stillness after a storm. Jacob and Ethan walked side by side along the northern perimeter, their boots crunching rhythmically in the fresh drifts. Hank ran ahead, his tail clearing a small path in the snow. Ethan stopped at the corner post, the one that took the brunt of the north wind's tension. He placed both hands on the frozen wood and shook it with all his might. It didn't move. It was as solid as iron, aligned perfectly with the next post, and the next, forming a flawless, straight line that stretched all the way to the ridge. Ethan dropped to his knees, his gloved hands brushing away the deep snow from the base of the wood. The gravel wasn't a solid block of ice. Because of the natural spaces between the smooth river stones, the heavy rainwater had drained completely away from the post, dropping down into the porous sand floor and disappearing into the deep subsoil before the temperature could drop. The remaining air pockets between the pebbles had acted like a giant, mechanical cushion. When the heavy clay surrounding the hole had expanded by 9%, the immense pressure didn't crush the wood. It simply pushed the loose stones into the empty air pockets. The gravel matrix had absorbed the Earth's fury, shifting a fraction of an inch to let the ice expand, then settling back into place when the pressure stabilized. The fence had survived because it hadn't tried to fight the valley, it had endured it. Jacob stood beside his son, his face lit by the pale gold of the winter sunrise. He reached down, patted Hank's head, and looked out over the white hills. Strength isn't about being unyielding, Ethan. The modern world thinks that if you make something big enough and hard enough, you can force the earth to stand still. But the earth doesn't stand still for anyone. True strength is knowing how to move with the land, knowing how to give a little so you can keep your footing when the deep freeze comes. Ethan stood up, his boots firmly planted on the snow-covered ridge. He looked at his father's worn face, then back at the perfect line of oak posts. His university degree felt small now, a collection of flat formulas that didn't know the depth of the clay. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the yellow concrete order form from the feed store, and tore it into small pieces, letting the white scraps fall into the snow. Later that afternoon, a familiar truck idled at the edge of their path. Thomas Reed got out, his boots crunching slowly as he approached the fence line. He didn't have his smirk anymore. He looked at the straight oak posts, then down at the loose river stones visible at the base. I have 80 posts to reset in the spring, Jacob. The concrete's all cracked to pieces. If you've got some time this evening, I'd like to see that old book your dad kept. Jacob smiled, a warm, genuine look that crinkled the weathered skin around his eyes. The kitchen's always warm, Thomas. Sarah just put a fresh pot of coffee on. Come on up to the house. Ethan watched them walk up the path together. He looked back at the fence one last time before following them. The old heartwood oak stood tall against the winter sky, rooted not in stone, but in wisdom.